It started with a whisper I wasn't supposed to hear. A muffled conversation through the thin walls of my own house. That's when everything changed. My name came up, followed by the words, "Sell everything," and "Put him in a home." I froze. My son, my only child, the boy I raised after his mother passed away, was plotting something behind my back. At first, I thought maybe I misunderstood. I wanted to believe it was about something else. But a parent knows. There was a cold edge to his voice I hadn't heard before. And just like that, I knew. Something was deeply, terribly wrong. I had just turned 65 2 months prior. I'd retired early from the postal service, hoping to enjoy the quiet moments of life. Gardening, Sunday crossword puzzles, maybe even adopting a dog. I had some savings, the house was paid off, and though I lived modestly, I was comfortable. My son, Daniel, had moved back in after his second failed business venture. I welcomed him without hesitation. After all, I was his father. That's what we do. We support our children even when they fall, especially when they fall. But I had no idea Daniel saw me not as a safety net, but as an obstacle. He started asking about finances casually at first, jokingly calling the house prime real estate, asking if I had a will, offering to help with online banking. It felt odd, but I chalked it up to concern. He had always been a bit reckless with money, but I figured maybe he'd grown. Maybe this was him trying to be responsible for once. I was wrong. The night I heard him talking to someone, probably his new girlfriend, I didn't sleep. I waited until he left the next morning and went straight to the office I hadn't stepped foot in for weeks. I pulled open the drawer where I kept my important documents. That's when the knot in my stomach hardened into something heavier. 2 folders were missing, my property deed and my bank statements. When I checked my online account, I saw a new shared access permission had been added. Daniel had given himself control. My hands shook, but my mind raced faster than my fear could catch up. The betrayal stung so deep I could barely breathe. How could he? After everything we'd been through. After I picked up every piece of his life each time it fell apart. I wasn't just hurt. I was insulted. And then I was angry. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to be sure. I needed to be smart. Daniel thought I was old, slow, harmless. He didn't know I'd faced much worse in my life than his entitled schemes. He didn't know I still had fight in me. I was going to watch. I was going to listen. And then, when the time was right, I was going to act. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after he'd gone to bed, staring at the wall. My life had shifted. My son, the person I loved most, had made me his target. But he wasn't ready for the man I used to be, the man who once delivered packages through snowstorms and chased down thieves without hesitation. I'd been quiet, too long. Now it was my turn. The next few days were a strange mix of pretending and watching. I smiled when Daniel walked into the room. I nodded when he talked about his business meetings. I even let him cook dinner one night, though the tension in my chest made every bite taste like sand. I wasn't just looking for proof. I was seeing it in everything. The way he avoided eye contact. How he always stepped out to take phone calls. The way he kept trying to usher me into long conversations about my future. I started noticing changes in the house. My mail was being redirected. Most of my bank statements stopped coming. A call to my financial advisor revealed Daniel had been asking questions, posing as me over the phone. The only reason they didn't release anything was because my advisor, Sandra, had known me for years. She flagged the interaction immediately. That call confirmed what I feared. This wasn't just curiosity. It was a plan, and it was already in motion. Daniel wanted me out of the way. He'd been researching long-term care homes. I found a printed brochure for one on the passenger seat of his car while taking out the trash. Peaceful Pines Retirement Living, it said, like some twisted joke. I wasn't even sick. I didn't need help. But if he could get control of my finances and my home and prove I was mentally unfit, he could have me placed somewhere, legally. It had happened to others, and now it was happening to me. What broke me wasn't the fear. It was the realization that I had raised this man. I had changed his diapers, stayed up with him through fevers, clapped at his kindergarten plays, and defended him when teachers called about his temper. I'd done everything I could to show him love and loyalty, and somehow, somewhere along the line, that had turned into entitlement. He thought my life, my home, and everything I built should belong to him. I tried to tell myself he was just lost, that he'd come to his senses. But one afternoon, I overheard the final confirmation. He was on the phone with someone, his girlfriend, I assumed, telling her that, once Dad's in, we'll have the house. I'll get power of attorney. Signed, it's just paperwork at this point. I stood frozen behind the hallway corner, hands clenched into fists so hard my nails bit into my palms. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just listened, then walked quietly back to my room. That night, I opened the locked box under my bed, the one with the documents I didn't trust anywhere else. Inside were photocopies of everything. My deed, my will, my bank info, and a thumb drive with recordings from the home security cameras I'd installed 2 years ago after a break-in scare. I suddenly remembered the cameras still worked, and some were inside the house too. Living room, hallway, kitchen. I hadn't checked them in ages. When I pulled up the footage from the past week, I saw things I wish I hadn't. Daniel had been in my office. He'd gone through my drawers. He'd used my laptop. He even sat in my chair, laughing on the phone while sipping from my mug like he owned the place. I watched him rehearse a conversation, trying out how to tell people I'd be better off getting care. My hands didn't shake this time. I didn't feel fear. I felt focus. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a hostile takeover. He thought he was clever. He thought I was weak. But what he didn't know was that the moment I realized his plan was real, I stopped being his father in that situation. I became something else, something stronger. He wanted to play games? Fine. I'd play too, but I'd play smarter, and I'd win. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how dangerously close I was to losing everything. Not just my home or savings, but my independence, my dignity, my entire identity. Daniel wasn't just making a greedy mistake. He was engineering my downfall, and if I didn't stop him, I would be trapped in a situation I might never escape from. It wasn't about pride anymore. It was about survival. I started reading about elder abuse, not the kind people talk about on the news, but the quiet kind. The kind that's buried behind closed doors, dressed up in legal forms and fake concern. I read case after case of people who had been declared mentally unfit by their own children, stripped of control, locked in facilities while their assets were drained. What haunted me most was how easy it was to make someone disappear when the paperwork looked clean and the signatures checked out. Daniel knew this. That's why he was moving slowly, quietly. He didn't need to hit me or scream at me. He just needed to paint me as confused, maybe a little forgetful, a concerned son, taking care of his aging father. That's all anyone would see. No one would question his intentions, because on paper, he looked like the hero. But I was still sharp. I was still me, and I wasn't going to let him rewrite my story. What hurt most wasn't the betrayal. It was the way he justified it to himself. I'd heard him say it. He's old. He doesn't even use half the house. I'm doing what's best for both of us. Like I was some broken appliance that needed replacing. I realized then that Daniel didn't see me as a person anymore. He saw a means to an end. He wanted the house to refinance for his next startup. He wanted the cash to travel with his girlfriend. He wasn't planning for my future. He was planning to erase me from it. If I ended up in one of those places, I'd be powerless. No access to my accounts. No say in where I lived or who came to visit. I'd be just another forgotten old man in a chair by the window wondering what happened. The thought made me sick. I had worked my entire life to build something stable, something safe, for me and for him. And now the very person I built it for was trying to steal it out from under me. But there was something Daniel underestimated. Something I hadn't even realized until then. I was still fighting for more than just myself. This house wasn't just walls and furniture. It was where my wife and I built our life. Where Daniel took his first steps. where I held her hand as she passed. Every corner held memories, real ones, not things that could be bought or replaced. If he took that from me, he wasn't just taking a property. He was destroying a legacy. And even more, he was setting a dangerous precedent. If I let him do this, if I stayed quiet and let him strip me of everything, then what would stop him from doing it to someone else? A partner, a friend, maybe even his own children one day. He needed to be stopped, not just for my sake, but so he would never feel entitled to play God with someone else's life again. That's when I knew. I couldn't just block him. I had to expose him. I had to make sure everyone saw what he was trying to do. And I had to take back control of the life he thought he could steal so easily. It wasn't going to be enough to protect myself. I needed to make sure he'd never forget what he tried to do, and that he'd never try it again. I didn't sleep much the night I decided to fight back. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was breathing again. My mind was sharper than it had been in years, filled with plans, strategies, and contingencies. I wasn't just going to stop Daniel. I was going to make sure he couldn't wriggle out of it with excuses or manipulation. He thought he was building the perfect scheme. What he didn't know was that I'd already begun building mine. The first thing I did was buy a new phone, one he didn't know about. I didn't trust my old one. He'd had too many opportunities to access it. I kept this new device hidden and used it only when I was away from the house. I used it to record voice memos of everything I remembered him saying, and to take screenshots of bank transactions, login attempts, and emails from my financial advisor. I also started documenting my day-to-day activities, simple things like reading, doing crossword puzzles, and walking to the store to prove I was mentally and physically capable. Then, I called Sandra, my financial advisor, and explained everything. I told her I needed copies of every document Daniel had tried to access, and I needed her to help me secure my accounts. She didn't hesitate. She put a fraud alert on my financial profile, froze unnecessary transfers, and flagged my power of attorney document for revision. I rewrote it that same week, this time excluding Daniel entirely and appointing Sandra's firm as legal overseer if anything happened to me. Next, I reached out to my lawyer, Mr. Harlan, a sharp and precise man I hadn't spoken to in years. When I told him what was going on, he didn't flinch. "If he's trying to prove you incompetent," he said, "you're going to need more than just proof of his intent. You'll need undeniable evidence that you're being manipulated. Let's build a case." That's when I realized the cameras, I still had them, and they'd been recording everything. I went back through the footage, carefully, hour by hour. I took notes, saved clips, created a timeline of behavior. There was Daniel rifling through my office drawers. There he was using my laptop, making calls, pacing with that same smug grin as he talked about taking over once I was placed. Every clip was dated and backed up in 2 locations. I even caught one instance of him mocking me, mimicking my voice like some senile old man. That one hurt, but it would serve me well in the end. The final part of the plan? I played along. I pretended to be forgetful. Asked him the same question. Twice. Looked confused when he mentioned finances. I even faked losing track of my keys. Daniel, thinking he was close to his goal, started pushing harder. He suggested I consider simplifying things, and joked that I could live somewhere where people could take care of everything for me. I nodded along, smiled, pretended to agree. But behind the scenes, I was locking everything down. The house title was moved into a protected trust under my name, with a legal block on sale or transfer without court approval. My will was rewritten, sealed, and stored in a secure vault. I even notified a local elder advocacy group and had them conduct a wellness check, at my request, just to have a third-party record confirming my competency. Daniel thought he was playing chess, but I was already 5 moves ahead. This wasn't just about protecting what was mine anymore. It was about holding him accountable, about making sure the story didn't end with me tucked away and forgotten. It would end with truth, exposure, and justice. And he would never see it coming. I started small, quiet, calculated. While Daniel busied himself with what he thought was a flawless endgame, I moved behind the scenes, setting every piece in place. Timing was everything. I couldn't afford even a single mistake. I needed every step to build toward the confrontation he never expected. I met with Mr. Harlan again and laid out the evidence. He was impressed, not just with what I had collected, but with how methodically I had done it. "This isn't just betrayal," he said, flipping through still shots and security footage. "This is premeditated. If we take this to court, he won't just lose access to your estate, he could face criminal charges." That's exactly what I wanted. At Mr. Harlan's advice, we filed a protective injunction. It prevented any changes to my power of attorney, any movement of property titles, and blocked unauthorized access to my financial records. I had it sealed, until we were ready to reveal everything, so Daniel wouldn't be tipped off. Meanwhile, Sandra helped me transfer the majority of my savings into a secure private account under a different trust name. I left just enough in my main accounts to make it look like everything was normal. Next, I hired a private investigator, not to follow Daniel, but to quietly collect digital footprints. I wanted every piece of the puzzle: text messages, social media posts, call logs, and GPS pings. I gave the investigator a list of dates and times to focus on, the ones when Daniel had said he was meeting with clients. Turned out, those meetings were with real estate agents, not business investors. He had already started shopping my house around under the table, claiming he would be inheriting it soon. That was the final push I needed. Once everything was documented and backed up, I wrote Daniel a letter. Not an emotional plea, not a confrontation. Just a calm, polite message asking him to meet me for lunch at a quiet, neutral cafe. I told him I'd been thinking about our future and wanted to talk about next steps. It was bait, and he took it. He showed up with that false sweetness I had grown to despise. He spoke like a man who thought he had already won, already imagined, himself celebrating the victory. "Dad," he said with a warm, fake smile, "I'm really glad you're starting to come around. I've found a place that's—" I stopped him with a raised hand. "I know what you've been doing, Daniel," I said evenly. "Every word, every step. I know about the accounts, the lawyers, the conversations, the house showings." His face went pale. I handed him an envelope, copies of the camera footage, transaction records, and the new legal documents. "This is everything, and you have two options. Walk away now, quietly, or I take this to court, and you lose more than just your inheritance. You lose your freedom." He stammered, tried to deny, tried to shift blame, but I just looked at him. No more anger, no more fear, just disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than any punishment. "I'm not the confused old man you thought I was," I said, "and I will never be again." He left the cafe without touching his drink, and just like that, the power shifted back into my hands. In the days that followed, I tied up every loose end, changed locks, removed Daniel's name from emergency contacts, left instructions with my lawyer and financial advisor on how to proceed if he ever tried to make contact again. I wasn't going to live in paranoia, but I also wasn't going to leave room for him to slither back in. What I learned through all of this is that protection isn't just about reacting. It's about preparing, document everything, ask questions, trust your gut, and never ever assume someone has your best interest just because they share your blood. Sometimes, justice starts with being brave enough to see the truth, then bold enough to act on it. Week after our confrontation at the cafe, Daniel tried to call me. I didn't answer. Then came the emails, apologies laced with excuses, half-hearted justifications, even guilt trips. He said he was confused, that he got carried away, that he thought he was helping me prepare for the future. But I saw through it. They weren't admissions of guilt. They were attempts to regain control. I forwarded the messages to Mr. Harlan. We added them to the file. That file, thick with evidence and statements, became my shield. It was proof that I wasn't paranoid, wasn't imagining things. It was validation. And in a world that often dismisses older voices, that validation meant everything. 2 months later, Daniel's girlfriend contacted me. She said he'd been spiraling. His reputation was shot. Apparently one of the agents he'd been speaking to about my house had reported his unusual behavior to her agency, and it had spread. Investors started backing away. His social media accounts went silent. The startups he bragged about so often? Gone. Vanished into the ether, along with his so-called credibility. I didn't rejoice in his downfall. Not in the petty way, at least. But I felt relief. Closure. He had built a trap for me, but walked into it himself. The community I had spent years quietly supporting, the neighborhood board, the small-town library, even the assisted living center down the road, rallied around me. Word got out, and I was invited to speak at a senior safety seminar. I told my story, not for pity, but as a warning. The ones closest to us aren't always the ones we should trust blindly, I said. We have to protect ourselves, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's family. I watched people nod, eyes wide, faces filled with recognition. I wasn't alone. That mattered. As for Daniel, I haven't seen him since. He didn't challenge the legal injunction. He didn't contest the changes I made. Perhaps somewhere, deep down, he knew he couldn't win. Or maybe he finally saw me, not as a stepping stone to his dreams, but as a man who refused to be erased. I walk through my house differently now. Every room holds the same memories, but there's a new feeling too. Strength, ownership, not just of the building, but of my life. I'm not naive anymore. But I'm not afraid either. This whole experience taught me something I'll never forget. Betrayal doesn't always come with slamming doors or raised voices. Sometimes it comes in soft words, concerned glances, and carefully worded lies. But that doesn't make it less cruel. If anything, it makes it more dangerous. Because when the attack is quiet, we don't always realize we're under siege, until it's almost too late. But no matter how far someone plans your downfall, you always have a choice: to fight, to expose, to reclaim. I did. And now, every time I wake up in this house, I remind myself that justice didn't come from rage. It came from resilience. It came from choosing truth over comfort, action over fear, and now, peace over chaos. Daniel lost more than an inheritance. He lost me. And that, in the end, was the real consequence.